Hello, listeners of the Mad Scientist podcast. I am your host, Chris Cogswell, here joined with my co-host, Marie Mayhew. Marie.
Late breaking news. America, all the ships at sea. That's my.
Is that your news?
that's my hot flash, late breaking news, sort of, from the 50s newsreel.
Nice hot takes from Marie Mayhew.
2018, new year.
Welcome to the Mad Scientist Podcast, Episode 1, Mufon.
"2018 New Year." We as a show had, and personally, really had a tremendous announcement. So I have been announced as the new director of research for Mufon, the Mutual UFO Network, which is like sort of, Marie, when we first met,
when we started this crazy little junket of ours,
like seriously though, when we started at Astonishing Legends,
toiling in obscurity. Sorry.
Right, toiling in obscurity. Scott and Forrest with the bullhorn and the whips and everything.
Now see here, you.
Yeah.
I want to know everything about the Yeti. You.
You're gonna tell me everything you know.
You're gonna tell me everything you can find out about these currents.
When we started, I had said, and I keep saying that my kind of, if I had to pick like a dream thing to occur for me to, through these podcasts and stuff, it would be to become more involved seriously in the research side of this stuff and figuring out, like, is this true? Is there anything to this idea? I think I originally said that I wanted to become like Bill Nye with a little bit of Mulder and Scully mixed in there.
With a soupçon of the supernatural.
Yeah, and it's kind of... It's kind of happening.
True.
It's kind of happening in front of our eyes, which is amazing. Like, when I was a kid, it's funny. Katie has a thing from when she was a kid that says, it was one of those kind of schoolyard things that asks, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And Katie put that she wanted to be a cantaloupe.
That is both sort of esoteric and postmodern and difficult.
It's interesting. She has not yet achieved that, but she's well on her way. To cantaloupeness, but I actually have a thing. I have a little thing that says that when I was a kid, I wanted to be a paranormal investigator. Is what it said. Actually, I think for a while I said I wanted to be an exorcist, and then I was like, no, I want to be like. Then I read, because like I was reading a lot of Constantine at the time, and then I was like, no, like I think I want to become like J. Allen Hynek and Stanton Friedman and these really interesting scientist kind of folks.
Maybe we could save the exorcisms for season 3.
Yeah, we'll wait. We'll wait on
Sweet
that.
Week or something.
I still don't even have my robes or anything yet. But
okay, get some holy water.
No,
that's good.
It's amazing. This is a dream come true, and I'm very excited. And so, listeners, if you want to get involved seriously in, we're trying to open things up to more than just kind of the fact finding stuff that we've been involved in up to this point. We're hoping to really get into other things. So yeah, Marie.
Chris. For the listeners who don't know about Mufon and don't know sort of the history of Mufon and what does it do? Tell them kind of like, I'm assuming that was part of the interview process. It's not a gotcha question. Like, so I want to know more about Mufon. What is this Mufon thing?
Yeah, so Mufon is the Mutual UFO Network. Mm-hmm. It was started in the year 1969, so it's about 50 years old now. And really, it was originally started as just a Midwest network. It was called the Midwest UFO Network. It was started in Illinois, and started by a number of different people. And basically, they had been initially associated with the Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization, or APRO. Mm-hmm. And so, what the idea is that the idea has always been to be a serious source of data collection, a serious source of investigation, and a serious source of kind of all of the theories and lore surrounding UFO stories. Now, over the years, there have been shifts in the way MUFON operates, and there have been changes in kind of how that mission statement has been applied. So in recent years, this is kind of why I decided that I wanted to join and try to take on a more formal role. In more recent years, it's kind of strayed, I think, in some people's minds away from the scientific sort of, analytical study of these things to more of a conspiracy. There's a little bit of conspiracy theory, and that's always been wrapped up in the UFO subject, right? I mean, in some ways, but it's kind of gone from a decidedly serious origins with the APRO and kind of these a group of scientists and military personnel getting together and saying, well, just what is it that we're seeing here, or people are reporting, to a almost more of an entertainment organization, right? And helping to produce TV shows and things. And the current executive director, Jan Harzan, I think is doing a really wonderful job, and one of
friend of the pod
for sure. And so just to be clear for listeners, my views are not the official views of all of Mufon. Mufon is a wide organization, although I have a role now in Mufon that allows me to kind of do more, and kind of help to steer the conversation a little bit. I think by this show's own, the history of this show, we're open to these discussions, and I don't think that, to steal a word or a line from Dan Ray in Boston, reasonable people can disagree reasonably. And so I may not all the time...
And then there's us. No, I'm just
right,
joking.
yeah. So I may not all the time agree with some of the ideas that are proposed out there in the UFO community, but I think that all data is good data, and all information is good information so long as you couch it the right way.
Yeah. And I think especially with the advent of what the New York Times put out recently in regards to their findings of the military about sightings, about what they have perceived as actual sightings that have more documentation and more disclosure than kind of anything recently in the last, at least in mainstream media in the last 20 years. I think it's pretty timely as well.
Well, there's a tremendous opportunity, right? And that's kind of, again, part of, I think, so there are podcasts out there that have huge audiences. I mean, ours is a relatively small podcast by comparison, right?
We're scrappy. I like to think of us as scrappy.
We're a punk rock organization.
We are Raj, scrappy.
Right. We're
street smart.
To Scott and Forrest's kind of, I guess,
juggernaut.
Right. To Scott and Forrest, like, Metallica, I guess.
Well,
they were underground, and then they went like super awesomely successful. We're kind of, we're like the Germs, or I don't know. We're the Circle
Pixies.
Jerks. We're not. Yeah, right. Well, Pixies even got pretty. Maybe Scott.
Pixies
actually, I think if we didn't say that Scott and Forrest were the Pixies, I think Scott would kill us. But anywho, so
they're more like Journey. No, I'm just teasing.
Oh, friendship snap. Over.
I know. No. They know I'm joking.
They know.
But I'm not.
Anyways, there are shows and there are serious people who, like in any of these stories, you have to have a good sense of humor, and you have to have kind of, there's a way to bridge between like complete denial and skepticism. And I think skepticism is a good thing. I mean, I think this show shows, if anything, that I am skeptical generally, but it's more of a, you can be skeptical without being dismissive, I guess is what I want to say.
Yeah, I think that when people say you're a skeptic or you're critical, it's sometimes more often than not viewed as a negative attribute. And I think skepticism, criticism, all of those things, like doubt is hugely important. It's in any sort of science or in any sort of research or in any sort of anything. It's the thing that kind of spurs you to learn more. Is like, well, I don't get this, or I don't believe this, or I have questions around this, and that's what spurs more of a conversation. So
right,
I think that's what we try and do.
Yeah, and I think that it's important too to kind of one thing that I find fascinating is that the search for or not even the search for UFOs necessarily, because like who knows? In my I don't know that we've ever found a craft or something. I don't know that, right? I don't know that we've ever had kind of direct, say, government contact with these beings or something. Even though Sam from Not Alone is going to yell at me later on, right? I don't know these things for a fact. I haven't experienced them myself. I don't know any of this stuff. But I think that to dismiss all of these people's experiences as all made up,
swamp
or
gas,
all ridiculous, right? It's almost like a lazy way out, right? I mean, if there are serious academic studies of religious experience or consciousness as a philosophical concept, or even experiences with extreme we can say extreme groups or extreme viewpoints, right? There are ways to study those things academically that I think the UFO subject has not really had the opportunity to be studied in that way. And I think part of the reason that hasn't happened is because groups like Mufon, or people that believe that they've experienced these things, have been really focused in the past on, did this happen? Is this true? Right? And while that is an important question and something that we should be looking at, I also think that there's value in the literal study of this phenomena as a social phenomenon, or as
as a cultural
moment.
Belief.
Exactly.
Right? It's almost like a non-secular religious event, right?
Exactly.
You witness something, you are a believer in something that is not necessarily tangible.
Exactly. And so what I want to do as director of research is try to broaden the scope of what we consider to be worthwhile research, right? If you are a philosopher and you are studying the mind-body problem, or you're studying the extremes of human experience, I think there's a lot of interesting questions to be had about people who claim that they've been abducted, right? If you're studying things like what is a science versus what is a pseudoscience versus, how is scientific progression made, or how is the public's view of science shaped by things like science fiction. Again, the study of UFOs and the work that Mufon does in collecting these stories could be a valuable source of information for you, right?
Yeah.
If you're a historian, this is a huge cultural moment. It is something that has shaped in many ways the way that we think of ourselves as a species, even, right? There are fascinating sociological and psychological and philosophical and, economic and all kinds of questions. There are fascinating ideas. And there's also, I think, value in doing things like thought experiments, such as, the kind of work that futurists sort of do, right? Where it's like, if we did have contact with another species, what do we expect it would be like?
Yeah,
right?
which is under hot debate, right?
Yeah,
even
exactly.
Now.
And again,
ask Hawking's that, and he's like, "Yeah, we're pretty much dead on arrival."
Right, and I mean, and that's the thing, is that the scope.
A little bleak.
Well, it's a little bleak. I mean, yeah, but like,
Skosh
it's okay.
Bleak.
It's okay. I think he's his whole life's work has given him the ability to make accurate predictions, I would say, or at least if he thinks it's bleak, I'm buying a helmet, right? Like, I'm at least gonna trust his judgment on that. Anyways, so what I kind of want to try to get across here is that I think that for serious researchers of all sorts, and again, maybe less so, honestly, for scientists, in some ways, because there's, we don't collect a lot of, well, we do collect physical evidence, in terms of like analyzing I don't know, with this disclosure, there has been talk about the alloy, we have alloys in a bunker somewhere or something. And I read something really funny on Twitter. I think it was probably off of, I can't remember who said it, but someone said that, the government has finally proven the existence of alloys, or something, as opposed to the existence of aliens, and it made me spit up my coffee and laugh. I was like, "Ha ha!"
Alloys.
But there's definitely something to be said about imagining. I mean, one area of research in material science say that it could be linked up to this, and is often linked up to this, is the idea of what thermodynamic states aren't achievable on the surface of the Earth, but might be achievable out in zero gravity environments, or, extreme temperature environments, or extreme gravity environments, the other way, as you approach, say, a supermassive star or something, right?
Yeah.
What kind of materials could we grow, or what kind of materials might we expect to be out there that are combinations of things that we don't think of right now, right? I mean,
or how can we build in zero gravity?
Right. Or how can we begin to design, support systems and things, right? I mean, there's like the number of scientists who, like myself, have, who started into science because of our love of stories like this, or science fiction movies, or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, that's a huge driving force for people becoming involved in science. And so to just, why not be part of a group that talks about that?
No, I mean, seriously. It's awesome because it does. I mean, to your point, for science fiction, it's the alien mythos, and what an alien is the backbone of, I would argue, is the backbone of science fiction, which is actually the backbone of so many other good stories about, like, in any kind of humanity's background, right? The thing that doesn't make sense.
Right.
Or, what else, the thing that is unknown. And I think that's, you look at anything that has been sort of a science fiction movie, book, whatever it is, and it's story, it's there's ones that are pivotal that change how we even talk about our culture, period, like War of the Worlds, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Orson Welles, the radio, I want to say it's like, I don't know, when was it? The 30s? I don't know. I don't have it up in front of me. But
I believe it was in the 40s.
Something. It was like basically treated, alien invasion, and it was played out dead serious. Although they did have little, little reminders at the end that throughout that this is a radio show, and it created havoc because of its convincing nature, and also because of that it tapped into the listener's psyche that hadn't necessarily been expressed or like released before. So I think things like that, when you see that, and it's kind of a watershed, those things are watershed moments, and you get to see them in a sci-fi setting that is so, like, again, it's like it is so much clearer because it's science fiction. If it's like an allegory, it sort of makes sense, but you can sort of take it apart. Or if it's historical, you can write it off from so many other things. But when you talk about science fiction, it's just changed enough that you suspend your belief and you're able to sort of get into it, and then all of a sudden it becomes something that's even more relevant, and that tells you more about who you are as an individual, who you are in the society, what the society is like. And that to me is like, that came from aliens. And so anything that is the study of that, to me is interesting. And it's almost like dear listeners are probably going to, don't pitch a fit about this, but it's almost irrelevant if they exist or if they don't exist in some ways, because the sheer fact that dialogue and that is occurring, and that we're looking for them, and that we're creating the language in which to try and define these things, defines us as well. And that's what, to me, is a fascinating thing about
what the way that I would look at it almost is, for a long time, and this is something to be said, so there's a couple points I want to bring up based on what you said, right? But one of the important, like, I look at it like the search for the voluminous ether, right? That was an idea that existed in science. Was that your band? Yeah, the voluminous ether.
Chris the voluminous ether.
Yeah. Yep, that was the band.
I like to think of that as like your prog rock experimental phase. It was like all of 3 weeks.
Oh man, slapping the bass like no one else. One of the interesting questions, so this voluminous ether, was a substance that we thought existed previously to Einstein's view of what gravity is, right? And so it basically was, we thought that it was kind of the, and not really what Einstein thought gravity was. The voluminous ether was sort of supposed to be the stuff that existed in between atoms. It was when we didn't think of vacuum or nothing as a concept even as being possible, right? We figured, well, there has to be something there in between these atoms, right? And so we called it the voluminous ether. And so we kind of used the ether, we kind of used it as a sort of, kind of a really easy way to make sense of some of this stuff about the problems that we had about things like, what is
catch-all.
What is in the presence? Well, like for instance, if you have, before we thought of things as waves, right? There has to be, or even if we do think of things as waves, there has to be something for the wave to be waving on. Right? Like you can't have if you have an ocean wave, the substance that the wave is moving is the water particles.
Right.
So if we have something like we have gravity, which seems to be a force that is acting at a distance away to something else, there has to be something to transmit that force.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so we were like, well, it's something that we don't know of yet, but we're going to just call it this other thing. Right. And we use that a lot for things like electricity too, and whatever, magnetism. Right. So the ether is kind of the stuff that is what the field is made out of that transports these forces for us. Right. And we did so much science with this made up thing as part of it. Right. Until we got to a point where we were like, actually, the ether doesn't seem to exist. But look at all this useful stuff we got from the study of it. Right?
Yep.
And to your point of, if these things exist or not is almost against the whole point of the study of them. Right? I mean, that's what the study is. Right? The study is, I think we should couch it in two different ways. There should be, do these things exist? But then also, if they do, what does that mean for us? Right?
Yeah.
And then you can take a step back further, kind of, a more meta analysis of what does the study of these things or the analysis of these things tell us about ourselves?
Yes.
Right? And kind of, there's interesting stuff and useful information, I think, to be made from the study of the UFO field from all angles. And I think that, though, that because it is an instance where, like, at the beginning of Mufon, it was an investigation of people experiencing something from a group of people who maybe had not experienced it themselves. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
It's sort of like the difference between being I don't want to make a negative connotation here to this association, but it's sort of like being someone who is looking at a disease from a scientific perspective as a doctor versus someone who has been affected by the disease.
Yes.
Right? Or being a patient.
Yes.
And so when MUFON kind of started, it was more to be, and this is kind of the view that I think people coming from a scientific point of view kind of want to have of it, or think that this is what it should be, is a group of not disinterested, but a group of dispassionate or separated individuals who are looking at this thing academically, right? But that's not really what MUFON has morphed into over time. MUFON has almost become something like a support group for people who feel that something traumatic has happened to them.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
And so
which I can imagine that experience.
And that is a valuable service for MUFON to play as well.
Yeah.
Right? To have, if you think it's the same as any other kind of group of people who think that they have had something unexplainable or metaphysical or whatever you want to call it happen to them, right? If you think that, I don't know, if you think that you have had an out-of-body experience as you've laid dying on the surgery table or something, you might find solace in meeting with other people who have had that experience. Or if you have been affected by, a disease or alcoholism or any other traumatic, life-altering thing that either has occurred to you or has occurred to someone you love, meeting with other people who have had that experience can be useful for you, right? And so
Yes, totally.
I think that we need to be cautious of. So in some ways, then when people go to a MUFON meeting, like when I go to a MUFON meeting, and I hear a story that I find to be fantastical or something, you need to keep in the back of your head that this is a place for people to feel comfortable telling those stories, right? And this is a place for people to feel supported or understood or whatever, as well as a place for serious research.
Yes.
And so I think that in some ways, the UFO community is almost seen, maybe not the UFO community, the experiencer community, the people that have believed that they've seen something or have been a person who has experienced something happen to them in relation to this field, almost look at skeptics and scientists as they almost may look at them in the same way that a true believer looks at an atheist, right?
Yeah.
It is a challenge to their very experience and worldview and being for someone to disbelieve them, right? Or there's nothing that we can say to someone who thinks that they've had a traumatic experience that it wasn't as traumatic as they think it is. You know what I'm saying? Like,
true. And scientifically, you can also see how that trauma affects people. There's physical attributes that that happen to someone, like post-traumatic stress disorder. If I got that right. That that actually have physical effects and mental effects.
And again, when we talk, that's one thing that I find so fascinating with the use, say the use of hypnotism, right, to study someone who thinks that they've experienced something, right?
Hypnotism, yeah.
So Marie knows my feel on hypnotism, right? I am less than impressed with the evidence that hypnotism shows us something true about what's occurred to us. So in other words, if you recall something in hypnosis, even if it is done by the most well-trained, academically focused hypnotist, psychologist, and it should be being done by someone trained in psychology, at least to some extent, right? In my opinion. If
somebody with something, right? Somebody with something like that.
Right. If during that hypnosis you recall something traumatic occurring to you, human memory is a fragile, changeable thing, right? And so the evidence that hypnosis allows us to have perfect recall of past events has fallen into disregard by the scientific community. But hypnotism may still be a useful treatment for traumatic disorders. It can still be a useful tool in the sense that it allows someone to confront what they believe to be a traumatic experience and look at it from a different perspective.
Yes.
And again, so what I would say is for UFO cases, we may not necessarily want to put hypnosis evidence as our best evidence, right? We may not want to put it forward to say, like, this 100% happened to them because they remember it occurring to them during hypnosis, right? We should be careful with the way that we use hypnosis, and we should be cognizant of using it in the way that accepted professionals think it should be used. But at the same time, the things that people do remember might be useful in other ways, right? Not least of which, it may be useful for the person who feels that something traumatic has happened to them to understand this trauma.
Yes. Yes. I think it's more of a psychological tool that's a decoder, right? Like something is too big for you to face, or too big for your mind to wrap its mind around.
100%.
Just because of what it's done to your own psyche, not because of what you're seeing or what occurred is beyond the comprehension of your mind, but the effect that it would have. And that may or may not be, of this earth. But a lot of times I think it's used, or when it's used, it makes more sense as the decoding device to begin to process, to have the mind be able to understand and process at a safe level trauma.
Absolutely. And look, I mean, we did our series on Betty and Barney Hill, right? That is one of my favorite UFO cases. It's the case that got me involved it's the case that got me interested, right?
Yeah.
And it's a case that I continue to read about as much as I possibly can, right? And it is a case that hypnosis plays an integral part in, right? And even the hypnotist himself that performed the hypnosis in his analysis afterwards, Dr. Simon said, my job isn't to tell the Hills what they experienced. My job is to help them confront what they believed they experienced and limit their trauma around it.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
And so what they remember, right, is worth cataloging and worth understanding. And if afterwards they believe that there is enough evidence for them that something occurred to them, and there's other physical evidence around the case, right? If that's the case, then I think it's worthwhile hearing their story, right? And understanding what occurred to them. And again, it may not be like one area that I think MUFON has kind of done a poor job in the past is putting forward what are the best cases that if you're going to look at a UFO case and come away with some sense of wonder, or, maybe there's something to this. What are the best cases that we can put out there for the public? Right? And for a long time, that case has sort of been Area 51 and Betty and Barney Hill. Right?
Well, but what you just said is sort of, even the criteria that you just put forward is sort of problematic, right? Because how do you define best in this type of a situation? Is it is it the most concrete evidence? Is it how do you, is it the, you know what I'm getting at? Is it the,
I do. No, 100%. It's like,
our listeners are probably like, what the hell is she babbling about? But is it how much media attention it got and how much it changed and influenced the minds of people that didn't necessarily believe in it? Like there's a million different ways that you can say, what is our case example that we would put forward? And I think that to me, like within your role in MUFON, is something that is going to be hugely interesting and hugely important to look at, because different people would define them very differently and would have a lot of really good and solid rational explanations behind their decision making for that.
Yes.
But it's like, can there be only one, or what is that?
Absolutely.
So I think that's important.
And I think defining what that criteria is like you said, going to be one of the primary challenges, right?
Yes.
If
because I'm sure that is something that people will feel strongly about.
Oh, absolutely. Of course they will. And and that's the thing, like there's is physical evidence better than corroborating evidence? So in other words, like if 1,000 people claim to see the same thing, is that a stronger piece of evidence than one person with a with a rock, a dent in their car, or a radiation spike around a tree, or whatever. That's a question we're going to have to face and figure out, right? And that's kind of why I'm trying to keep it open. Again, with anything, you got to keep an open mind. You have to see what is the best evidence, what is the best criteria, what is the best way to talk about this subject. And that's why I think it is going to be really important to have such a huge group of interdisciplinary people working on this subject.
Yeah. Right? And I'll tell you what, my husband's all excited you're doing this.
Oh, I'm sure he is. I actually
finally talk to somebody about what his experience was.
I actually have someone who I think saw the same thing as your husband.
Oh, seriously?
Who emailed me.
Quick side note.
We'll have to talk after talk afterwards.
Well, just as a quick side note for people that listen, my husband, my poor put-upon husband, has he saw a craft from the Hudson Valley sighting in Connecticut in the 80s.
Yeah.
And he, to this day, even though I will deride him and I will challenge him at every time he brings it up, which sometimes is like a lot. It's like a couple times a month over nothing. Like we'll be doing the dishes and he'll be like, "Did I tell you about that time I saw a UFO with my dad?" I'm like, "Yes, Paul." But it's like he, to this day, the facts, the stories, they're all the same. They're all the same thing, and he so wants to have some corroboration around this. And he's so, like, again, this is sort of like someone I know who, I relatively trust, that has this viewpoint and who wants to know more and who kind of wants to have a community that says, "Hey, I saw something similar." Because even like after this whole thing with the New York Times, that prompted him to go back and try and find anything from the old newspapers that talked about it or anyone else who saw it. And so it's interesting because it's like, even though he's to this day has an amazing recall of it, it's still almost not enough for him. And I'm sure it doesn't help that the woman he married is like, "Yeah, you know what? Weather balloon."
Right. You're like swamp gas all day.
Weather balloon.
One thing that I think is really interesting, though, that I think we do have to be really careful of is the power of faith and dogmatism, right?
Yeah.
There is I think, kind of really interesting and in some ways insidious, as it always is. Dogmatism is always kind of insidious in the way that it reaches out and becomes something, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there is a strong connection with, or there seems to be kind of a strong, interesting connection with religiousness and the feelings of being connected to something higher than yourself that you don't necessarily understand, and the same kind of feelings that someone may have about the UFO subject, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's an area where I think we need to be very careful, both in talking to people that do have this feeling, but also in how do we as an organization move forward and ensure that we're not kind of tainting our evidence pool, right?
Yeah.
Because there are people who, one of my favorite types of stories about this actually comes from Last Podcast on the Left. Ben Kissel talks about being a kid and going to kind of a like revivalist church and being told that he has to talk in tongues or get pushed over by the priest to show the power of, kind of one of those like, the power of Christ pushes you, right? And then you move backwards and whatever. And in some ways it's very similar to hypnotism, where you're just doing what's expected of you in that social climate.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so we need to be really careful about getting together a group of people who are maybe more open to suggestion, who are maybe more open to new ideas, and we need to be careful about then how we put this information out, because we don't want to be dogmatic in any way, or we shouldn't want to be, right? And we also need to be then careful about creating maybe not belief, but creating dogmatism in our thinking that there maybe wasn't before, right? What's kind of funny is, like, if there is a type of science that hasn't become dogmatic at some point in its history, I would love to see it, and it's even and not just science, the study of anything always eventually becomes dogmatic.
Religion,
a little
right?
bit, right?
Any organized religion.
Yeah,
becomes,
sure. And one area that I think is really funny, though, is that it's kind of like, it's kind of like the guy at the punk rock show with the with the the mohawk and the studs and everything else, saying that you're not punk enough because you don't have a mullet or a mohawk and studs.
Because you have a mullet and no mohawk.
That's not a mohawk. You know what I mean? Like it's like the nonconformist. It's becoming conforming to nonconformity, right?
Oh, completely.
It's the same kind of idea. It's like, oh, you don't think that the, whatever, you don't think that such and such is true. Well, then you can't be part of this group that is by definition outside the realm or outside the bounds of sort of standard science, right?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
you don't believe, so it's kind of funny. Like I find myself, and I'm sure a lot of listeners too find themselves in the same kind of category where it's like, you're not skeptical enough to not believe the stuff, but you're not believer enough to be completely welcomed with open arms in every situation, right? It's kind of,
It's
but
true. I guess
but I have to say, I think that MUFON as an organization has really heard, at least has really heard my opinions and kind of concerns and ideas and stuff, and been super open to them. And I think that, one thing that I really want to do as director of research is ask, if you are not a member but you have an idea for something that you think is a worthwhile study, a worthwhile pursuit that we should be looking into, or perhaps even just have comments or ideas about what we can do better to try to bring you into the fold, I would love to hear those ideas. My official email through MUFON is directorresearch, all one word, @mufon.com.
Bam.
You can always reach me through the show stuff too. And this show is going to continue. Like, don't, just because I now have another hat to wear does not mean that this show, my first love, and you listeners, my so-called first you guys are my first priority, the listeners. So, don't think that this show is going to slow down or change or anything like that, because it's not.
No.
If anything, now I just have a bigger megaphone to be annoying through, which is phenomenal news. Anyway, so Marie, any other kind of stuff you think we should touch on here? What do you think?
Oh, you know what? Like, the one thing I will say is, like, I got to give props to MUFON, one, for bringing you on board, because I think that it is, I hate to use the word disruptive, because that's such a Silicon Valley, 2000s word, but it is disruptive to bring on someone who's younger, who has a slightly different way of looking at things. But I think that there's something to be said for an organization that's based on this, that has been in existence and has the longevity that they've had, right? To me, out of my, again, it's sort of more of a popular culture, limited knowledge of it, but still relatively well expanded. I don't know of somebody else besides, or another organization besides MUFON, that has this sort of prevalence. So I think that there's this history and sort of backbone to be able to go in and begin working, and I think it's going to be really exciting. I'm excited.
I'm excited too.
I'm hoping that they're
really
going to give you
excited.
some keys to Area 51. I hope that they've got like some kind of vault archive underneath Denver International Airport.
What's really funny?
So invested in this.
What's really funny is really funny is actually, one of the funny things when we first joined was trying to figure out, okay, well, what do we have? What are the resources we have access to? What can we really do here? Whatever. And one of the hopes that I really want to bring to MUFON, or one of the new ideas at least, is reaching out to all of the awesome people out there who are doing this kind of content stuff, like podcasts and YouTube channels and like Twitter accounts that put out the best UFO news and whatever. Why, reach out to those people. Like, they're doing this on their own already. They're kicking butt. There's some amazing shows on this topic. You know what I mean? And the fact that we're not,
utilizing that.
It's part of, again, the challenge of sort of, being an organization and, moving things ahead and whatever. And it's also sort of a challenge, to be completely honest, of, I don't want to say demographics necessarily, but that's kind of what it is. Like, we are sort of people that have grown up in our kind of like generation, right? Where you had Star Wars and, the X-Files and, comic books and video games and whatever. I would say are much more open to this idea and much more open to this sort of study as a worthwhile endeavor, because of its sort of applications to futurism, but also because of its interdisciplinary sort of ideas that can come about, right?
Yeah.
And I think that in that way, we're sort of there's sort of a benefit to a group like MUFON existing, because it can be a place where all these ideas come together. But I think that, to be completely honest and frank, MUFON is kind of MUFON has in some ways lost a lot of people's faith, and has in a lot of ways lost a lot of people's trust. Where one thing that I just one important role that I think MUFON has that maybe isn't thought of highly enough potentially is our responsibility to people who come to us and say, I've had something happen to me, can you help me understand it? Right?
Yeah.
We are, just like any other organization, I guess it's sort of like the, I think that it is immoral to bring someone who is selling snake oil in to a place. It'd be like if your doctor, it would be like if your doctor brought in someone who was, a faith healer or something, to your operating room and was like, well, just in case, not even just in case. Like I think that MUFON is a place that takes in these stories and talks to these people and puts out this information, has a responsibility. And this is actually a huge part of our kind of code of ethics and conduct, right? Is we have a responsibility to these people and to the public to be truthful and forthcoming and to kind of protect this community of people who think that they've experienced something from people who maybe, just want to make a quick buck or
Agreed.
Want to sell them falsehoods or whatever.
Agreed.
That is something that I think MUFON hasn't done necessarily a great job of in recent years, let's say the past 10 years or so. But I think that it is something, and I think that that's just part of, honestly, I think that that's just kind of part of the growing pains of having a large organization.
Yeah.
Like MUFON's been around, true. MUFON's been around for 50 years, let's say, but it's not a hefty organization in the sense of having, it's a volunteer organization.
Yeah.
Right. And
wait. We're not getting paid? No, I'm just
I'm out. It's a volunteer organization, and without sort of the without having people that are going to be on top of this and really try to keep that good faith in line, it can be challenging. And I think that it's just a matter of continuing to build on the successes of the organization, and that's a big thing that I want to try to do.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think that's important. I'm excited. I'm excited to see what you do with it.
I'm super excited. Are you kidding me? It's gonna be great.
It's gonna be very cool.
I mean, we've already done it's so funny. I've had probably 10 phone calls with people that I've read their books in the past, or I've heard them on radio shows, and I'm just
that's cool.
Getting to talk to them and hear their view of things, and kind of, what do you think? What do you think we can do better? Where do you think research should go? What do you think we should be focusing on? Whatever, and getting to hear all these people with different experiences is really great. And then also too, in the past couple of weeks, I have heard some stories that have curdled my blood.
Sweet.
I have heard stories that have terrified me.
I love that stuff.
It's. I will tell you that it is.
Don't tell any of them.
No, I won't. Well, the thing is,
no.
I would say that for someone that has never talked to someone who thinks that they've experienced something like this, you can definitely tell the difference between someone who has had a traumatic thing happen to them, and they're talking to you and they're shaking and they're almost near tears, and someone who, is like, well, they told me that I am the one true God, and I'm gonna do this awesome stuff, and you gotta buy my DVD. You can. I think you can tell the difference. I think you can tell the difference, and I think that it is important that we kind of cut through the bullshit. Let's say, And I mean, listen, I'm gonna get pushback, right? I am gonna get. It's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Like Marie said, I do hope to be a disruptor in some ways, right? Yesterday at the meeting, I gave my first official presentation, and I was fucking terrified. So I hope it was videotaped, which is really cool. Minnesota MUFON, they videotape all their meetings and talks and stuff, so you can actually go check them out on YouTube.
And we will have links on our site.
Yes, we will. We will, of course. And so when my talk gets up there, I'll put it up there, assuming I look good.
Regardless, you're fine.
Right? No, but like I hope that they will just put the slides and then my voice, because I sweat a lot. I was very nervous, Marie.
Shut up.
Which is like hilarious because everyone at these meetings has been so awesome and sweet and great, and then I'm up there and I'm like, "Hi, my name is Chris. I'm really scared. How's everyone doing?"
Dude, I don't even have to tell you about my fear and loathing of public speaking.
Well, the thing is, like, I love public speaking. It is like, if there is one thing that I feel like I inherited from my parents, like a good thing, it would be my ability to just like get up on stage and bullshit for hours.
Seriously,
like that is not a problem. I got that from my dad. It's just something he was able to do. And then for my mom, I got my my stunning good looks and
Dora. I love Dora
and super strength.
And super strength.
You know? But anyways, I would say that I'm going to get some pushback here for some of these ideas that I have. I'm going to get some pushback for some of the ideas that I think maybe are not helpful or not, maybe not, again, all data is good data. Not to say that they're not worth investigating, but we have to do some pruning, right? There's some, President Obama probably isn't a giant lizard person.
Well, no.
Right? Like, probably not the case. I mean,
canon. That's canon. No. Well, I think, like with anything, there will be compromise in some regards. You won't be able to execute everything that you want to do or change everything to the way you think it should be changed, which wouldn't necessarily be right, like you're saying anyways. But at the same time, you're able to bring something new to them as well. So I think it's good. I'm sure that your public speaking was fine.
Yeah, it was okay. It was fun.
Did you pass out in the middle of it?
No.
Okay, got me beat. Did you throw up?
Not this time.
You're doing good. Doing good.
Doing great. So, anyways, yeah. So, listen, dear listeners, if you want to get involved in MUFON, please do so. Shoot me an email.
Yeah.
We're really trying to increase kind of what MUFON does. So one of the things that I'm really hoping to start looking into doing is communicating more to the MUFON general audience about the science that we should be, kind of the baseline science that we should know, right? As people, because like there are people that go out and do investigations, right?
Mm-hmm, which is cool.
That's actually probably a really important point for me. You should probably go over kind of the way that the organization is broken down.
Yeah.
Right? So MUFON has an executive director, and that's Jan Harzan. And he's great. He's a really smart guy, very open ideas and things. Then you have kind of the functional directors, which I am one of. And there's a few of us, and there's people that are kind of, the director of membership or the director of investigations, the director of media and communications. There's different roles out there. And again, these are people that have shown a commitment to this field and the study of this stuff, and also have the credentials to kind of back up what they're putting out there, right? So you have these kind of functional directors, and then you also have a board of directors, which are kind of the people that really help fund the organization and help keep it going. And so these are people that again have an expressed interest in this field and think that it is something worth investigating, and really they're them and the membership dues that are charged to members are really the way that MUFON gets to do anything, right?
Yeah.
And then you have at the local level, you have your state directors, and then you have the directors of investigation for that state, and then you have the investigative team, right? And then within MUFON itself as well, there is a scientific advisory board, which I am hoping to kind of kick in a high gear and get going here. There's also teams of researchers who are specifically installed in order to help analyze scientific evidence, whether it be a material or a biological specimen or even something whatever simple as psychological profile or something, right? There are people
Yeah.
that do that. Simple. I call it simple. It's probably the most complicated thing.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That'd be
Taking
cool.
an XRD thing is not hard, but taking a psych profile or something, or coming up with some overarching idea of statistics on this subject, that's an important
it's cool.
thing that we do. Then you have kind of have a specialized team of researchers, and they're kind of the ones that are going out to cases that we find to be especially interesting and important, and really kind of doing a deep dive on those cases. And then we also have, though, at the local level, we have investigators who go out and investigate and take the information on cases that are reported in the local area.
See, that would be cool. So if one of our listeners feels like they have any kind of inclination or interest to first become a member, and then also there's the opportunity to be able to work in more of an investigatory
capability. You can go out and start researching UFO cases within the month.
See, that's good.
It's a matter of each state and everything, but you can go out there, and again, you can be part of the local meetings where you have, it's almost, again, more of a, it's a collegial atmosphere, but there's also, of course, a huge range of opinions for people who think that they've experienced something, all the way to scientists who are there that, are just there for the, the evidence, right? And of course, you're going to get people that just come because they're interested, right? And then what I'm hoping to do is open up those roles a little bit more to start having, local historians, right? Someone who's on a team that records the history of the area in terms of this subject and any local legends and lore and stuff.
So that's cool.
Opening it up to a local board of interested scientists who give consultation to the local board on, listen, we had a talk last week that used quantum mechanics in a way that is silly. We should address that, right? Like, that's a hugely important role.
That's when I come in. With all my charts and graphs and red string, I'm going to be like, and then the wormhole shall open.
But really, though, like, it is important to show both sides of a story.
Yes.
And also to be able to give the public who's coming to these things enough info that, listen, you can decide, or you are going to be able to then tell for yourself if someone is selling you a bridge in Brooklyn or if they're telling you something true.
I think that that's that is a good balance to be able to come to. Yeah.
And so we're trying to find ways as well to kind of open up the books a bit to increase membership. Mm-hmm. So, if you're a PhD or a master's degree student, you can come in and start up as a consultant, or consultant, or there's another term for another type of researcher that is a specific role. But again, you can also become, one thing that I really want to do is start to do more almost peer review. Ooh. Where I would like to get a board. And again, I understand, like, it is scary as a scientist to kind of come out and say, I find this stuff fascinating. Right. And I think as our generation starts to take on more roles within science, that's going to stop being the case. But it is still a little bit scary. Right. And what I would like to start doing is have, we have this case. This was investigated this way. I would love it if there was a board of people out there who would anonymously review our investigations.
Oh, wow. That's a great idea, actually.
And see.
And that's important. That's like objective, that's objective qualifying data looking at something.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the whole point, is that making this more of a, listen, I mean, how do biologists or sociologists or anthropologists or whatever study a topic, right? That involves people doing things and having subjective experience and whatever. They do it in a way that is scientific and allows for really good analysis, right? Yes. And that's what we should be doing.
Yes.
So anyways, I have a whole lot of ideas. I could talk about this for hours, Marie. But dear listeners, I want to thank you again. It is literally all thanks to you listening to this show that I have, basically achieved my dream job.
That's awesome. It's
I mean, it's great.
It's a good gig. It's a good gig, and
It's
you're going to be able to
amazing.
do a lot with
I'm
it.
so happy. I'm so thankful to all of you listening, and I hope that you know what we can keep things going here and make this a really worthwhile thing, and also can make you listeners proud of the work that I do, the work that Marie does, and kind of put I want to say live up to the honor and opportunities that you listening to this show have given us.
Oh, absolutely. Now I'm all kind of tearing up, dude.
Not to get all teary-eyed, I know. I'm such a...
I love you guys. But honestly, we really, every time somebody says that they actually listen to the show and they're not related to me, i.e. my mother, I'm just like, really? Oh my God, thank you. That's amazing. Or anytime anybody does any like fun little art, that's awesome. That's continuously awesome. Or that wants to help us with research and Igor, or is it Igor? It's Igor. I am just, it's such an honor, and I'm so humbled by the intelligence of people out there, and it's always wonderful. So thank you. And again, kudos to Dr. Cogswell, who I want him to get a business card now, an official Mufon business card that we're just going to be like, or a badge or something.
I actually have to.
Oh my God.
I have to get all that stuff.
If you get a badge, I swear to sweet Jesus, we're doing a photo shoot. I don't get
a badge, but I do get get a card.
I want that business card.
I do get like an official pass and whatever.
Like the badge. I just want you to show up and just flip the badge and just be like, all right, I'm Dr. Cogswell. I'm here from Mufon. What do we have?
Perfect.
See, I've already, and I will just be smoking a cigarette behind you, not saying anything. I've already got a treatment in my head. See, that's what I'm bringing to it. But anyways, congratulations. I am so excited for you, and man, I'm really excited to see where this goes.
Oh, it's gonna be great. All right. Well, thank you again, dear listeners, for listening. This has been the Mad Scientist Podcast. I am, as always, closing out with the news story. I am your host, Chris Cogswell. My co-host is the wonderful Marie Mayhew.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you again.